A Russian company owned by a Maltese passport buyer has been suspended from the London Stock Exchange. A Maltese minister has responded to a mother who is facing homelessness, and a testy altercation between a protester and a Maltese police officer has been filmed outside the Russian embassy in Malta. All this and more on Lovin Daily. Good evening, Malta and Gozo. Jonathan Chile here, joined by Julian Bonici today. We've got some updates from the latest locally as far as the Russian-Ukraine invasion is concerned, as well as from the courts and the environment. Julian is here with details on our first story.
Yeah, so on to our first story. A Russian company owned by one of Malta's very own passport buyers has been suspended from trading on the London Stock Exchange in the wake of the Russian government's invasion of Ukraine. So earlier today, the LSE said it was moving to block the trading of certain companies, which included Polius, with immediate effect in light of certain market conditions. Polius is run by Pavel Grachev, who acquired Maltese citizenship along with his family way back in 2017. Grachev is the CEO of Polius Gold. That's the largest producer of gold in Russia, and it's actually one of the world's largest gold mining companies. Almost half of his declared net worth is about almost half his declared worth of 42 million is derived from a single bonus payment of 20 million paid to him by a BVI shell company. According to information acquired by the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation, Grachev and his family had first actually tried to apply for Maltese citizenship back in 2014, eventually satisfying the 12-month requirement in very dubious circumstances. He rents out a flat in Porto Malta for €2,800 a month. However, he spent less than 10 hours in Malta throughout the total of 2014. His meeting as well with identified Malta officials just happened on one day, and literally he opened his account a few minutes later. Now, obviously, the story comes at a time during while all eyes are on the Russian government's invasion of Ukraine, and of course Malta's passport scheme, right? You know, I think it was only yesterday that Malta suspended selling passports to Russian and Belarusians, following intense public pressure. Just a reminder, a few days before, Alex Muscat and Roberto Bella were sort of diminishing concerns. But, you know, it's really interesting to see, you know, how Malta's passport scheme, which is Lovin Malta actually wrote about extensively itself, actually has some real-world implications on this case. John, what do you think about it all?
You know, this is just kind of one of the first aspects of the Russia-Ukraine invasion hitting home, hitting locally, not just locally, but in London as well. Like Julian pointed out, you know, we kind of halted the passport scheme in the face of people coming from Russia and Belarus, and now we're going to start seeing some consequences of that. So this is just the first of it, and if the invasion continues to escalate, expect to see more of this kind of intervention when it comes to businesses, companies, and passport holders. Talking about government intervention, and moving on to the next story, Social Accommodation Minister Roderick Galles has kind of reacted to a Maltese mother who last week Lovin Malta revealed a story where she said she's facing homelessness after renting out her government supplied apartment to third parties. Very interesting story. It did super well. A lot of discussion was actually, formed online about this. So definitely let us know what you think in the comments about this. But let's get into what the minister had to say about this. So the woman in question, Donatella, said that she was facing homelessness from the home that she's raised her kids in. And now Roderick Galles said, listen, the government has social policies there to ensure that justice is being done, but the government cannot turn a blind eye to abuses. So he said, listen, quote, an effective social policy requires one to be sensitive to people's needs, but also firm on abuse of public resources. This story shows how seriously we've taken the abuse of social accommodation in recent years and how we acted when necessarily after investigating and verifying. So this story is quite an interesting story. You know, apparently the Donatella had been advertising a bed on sites like booking.com, which is a very popular site for tourists coming into Malta who are looking for somewhere to stay. The thing is, she can't do that. If she's getting social accommodation, it's in the contract that you're not allowed to make money or rent it out to third parties. Donatella maintains that she was unaware of the kind of details of the contract, and she says that she's now facing homelessness if she's evicted from this apartment. So it's interesting kind of seeing what the minister has to say. You know, on one hand, of course, the government has to be very sensitive to social issues. On the other hand, though, you know, if someone's abusing the contract very openly, what do you expect the government to do?
Yeah, I think that's it, you know, and in a way I do feel sort of somewhat for Minister Galdes, right? He's sort of caught between a hard and a rock and a hard place, right? Because on one end, as something he knows well, the social housing in Malta has been used and abused by so many people for generations, you know, and social accommodation is not reaching the people who actually need it. So really Donatella, you know, as much as she probably wanted to settle everything, she's probably the victim of overzealous enforcement nowadays for regulations that were not followed for a really long time. You know, I do hope a solution is found, you know, but you can sort of understand both sides of the divide, right? You know, it's social housing, it's meant for people who need it, and if you're breaking the rules, unfortunately sometimes, you might have to pay the consequences. On to our next story, from being evicted to a house to not being allowed near one. Two protesters confront the police officer outside Malta's Russian embassy in San Juan last night after he refused to let them approach the building. One of the protesters, Artem Terkov, filmed the officer stationed outside the embassy, telling them to keep their distance and not approach the building. "It's my job to keep it secure," the officer told them, as protesters sort of started arguing with him, telling them that they have no intention of causing harm because we aren't killers like them. Terkov, who actually has Russian roots but is a Lithuanian national and resides in Malta, said he and his friend visited the embassy at around 8 p.m. last night to show their support for any people protesting against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Terkov first had some criticism for actually being surprised that no one was in front of them, even though people have been appearing in the days before. However, he said, you know, that the officer insisted that we stay away from the embassy and not even approach the building or the wall. As Terkov said, you know, I understand they're doing the job and are afraid of potential provocation, but it wasn't our intention to harm or destroy the building. And there's no way we could have climbed the wall anyway. Maybe we just wanted to stand in front of the gates with posters in our hands and speak, but he didn't even let us approach it. Now, Terkov and his friend sort of gave up on that, and they went to the doorstep of the Russian Cultural Center in Valletta, where they actually managed to stick protests and actually found some people passing by announcing their support for what they were doing. What's really important to understand about the police officer in question: listen, everyone out there, he was just doing his job. You know, he's a policeman stationed outside the embassy, just as there are police officers stationed outside every embassy in Malta, outside judges in Malta, you know. So obviously, he was probably seeing how best to do his work. Obviously, this comes a few days after posters erected onto the thing were taken down, you know, and there's obviously a lot of contention around the Russia-Ukraine situation.
I mean, I think a lot of Russian protesters might expect crowds to form outside embassies, but that's not exactly how Malta is reacting to the Russia-Ukraine invasion. In fact, a lot of people argue we're doing a better job by collecting resources, clothes, medicine, and funds to be sent to Ukraine, as opposed to, you know, outside protesting outside embassies. The video of the protest, or lone protest as it were, is on our Instagram and Facebook page, so definitely check it out. Let us know what you think. I thought it was very interesting that the man Terkov actually, you know, turned to the houses nearby and started shouting at them, saying, "Malta, where are you? You might be next. You're next." You know, implying that, you know, if Putin does continue to invade Ukraine, might even come to Malta. So definitely let us know what you think of the video in the comments below. Moving on to the next story, a bit of a win on the environmental side. The Planning Authority has unanimously rejected an application to develop a 43,000 square meter plot of arable land in Imjar. This land was going to be used as a solar farm, but it was shut down after a lot of Maltese farmers, as well as residents, as well as activist groups, you know, raised the alarm over it, saying that this would cause direct damage to the work of Maltese farmers, as well as to the natural environment of the site and to the area of archaeological importance located on the land. So Movement Graffiti, a well-known pressure group, NGO, they were kind of part and parcel of this. They were working closely with residents to raise the alarm over this and get their voice out there, and it seems like it's worked. This is one of the few times that the PA has, you know, kind of unanimously agreed to not allow development to take place.
Yeah, you know, I think, you know, as much as it should be celebrated. I'd really look for some consistency, right, from the planning authority moving forward. As much as it's all well and good to see a project like this rejected, we know it's not the case for countless projects on ODZ land and projects that sort of harm the heritage of an area. What I would say, and Movement Graffiti said it right, I guess what it shows, like this case, like what happened with the Marcel Scala Marina proposal, sometimes when residents come together and really push hard, a lot of change can happen, so sometimes we might feel like we're alone and stuff, but some action is all it really needs. On to our final story, quite a sad story about Malta's still controversial drug laws. A young Nigerian man has been sentenced to 9 years in prison over the importation of 3 kilos of cannabis in Malta and fined a further 20,000 euros for it. Shaibu Mohammed was just 21 years old when he came to Malta via flight from Rome on 22nd December 2018. Customs officials were immediately suspicious and sort of checked the man and found 3 packets of cannabis on his person. Eventual testing found that the plant was around 90% pure. He was arrested and charged in court with importation, possession and association with the intent to traffic drugs. Now, before standing trial, Mohammed actually pleaded guilty to the charges, saying he only did what he did because he needed money for his family. He needed money to help his mother who was dying. Crying in court, Mohammed said that he had no time to think about what he did. He had time to think about what he did while being in prison for over the last 4 years. However, Judge Aaron Bojea seemingly had none of it, saying if you really wanted to help your mother, he wouldn't have turned to crime. Really understanding from the judge. Mohammed was eventually sentenced to 9 years in prison. It's a really long time for a young man. Quite shocking, I think. Something our courts are missing is compassion, and particularly when they're foreign nationals and not Maltese, as we saw in the case with Daniel Holmes, right? We're having talks about drug legalization, but then we're seeing some very harsh sentences being dished out.
I think there are a couple of points to be brought up here. So regardless of Mohammed's specific details, let's be very blunt, there are a lot of drug mules that are found by traffickers, by big sharks. These are people in their late teens, early 20s, who are in a bit of a financial situation. They might have a family to support, they might have a debt or whatever, and they'll be asked very simply, listen, take this bag of cannabis, take this bag of pills, take this bag of cocaine, put it somewhere, get across the border, and we'll pay you 5,000, 10,000, 1,000, whatever it is. And it seems that many of these drug mules are caught, and they are the ones that have to bear the brunt of justice. This guy was found in 2018. It seems like he spent the last 4 years already in jail awaiting sentencing, just to be sentenced to another 9 years in jail. That's a total of 13 years of punishment for one packet. Is that the right way of approaching this? I'm not sure. I have to be convinced on this. I don't know how much this man, Shaibu Mohammed, is going to benefit from for all these years in prison, being locked up. I don't know what Maltese society is going to benefit from it. And if the case is true that he really just did this to help his family or his sick mother out, his sick mother is going to be even worse on this. Now, I understand that, if you are desperate, you should not turn to crime. I totally get that, but we need to start understanding the intricacies of these stories. It's not as straightforward. Some guy decided to come across the border with a bunch of cannabis. There's reasons behind it. There's probably someone behind it, urging him to do it, paying him to do it. And until that is investigated, it just seems that more and more young, innocent people are going to be locked up for this. So let us know in the comments below what you think about this, whether Malta should have a different approach to that. I think both from myself and Julian, that brings us to the end of today's episode. As always, have an evening full of lovin'.